The Vatican's Doctrinal Office sent a letter to the U.S. bishops offering guidance on how to deal with Catholic politicians who support abortion in defiance of church teaching. We'll explore that letter in a moment, but the president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Archbishop Jose Gomez, asked if he could make public a 2004 letter from Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger when he instructed the U.S. bishops on this same topic while head of the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. Well, Cardinal Ladaria, the present head of the office, said no. That 2004 memo, he claims, was meant as a private letter to the bishops, and Ladaria says he'll respect Ratzinger's wish that the letter not be made public, at least not in 2004. You might call this the return of Teddy McCarrick. It's clear that despite time and the horrendous public scandals, numerous sexual scandals, and even lying to the Pope, the Teddy McCarrick doctrine remains operational. Back in 2004, the bishops were contending with John Kerry, the last Catholic pro-choice Democrat who ran for the presidency. Cardinal Ratzinger wrote the U.S. bishops a letter which he sent to then Cardinal Theodore McCarrick to share with them. It read, "Regarding the grave sin of abortion or euthanasia, when a person's formal cooperation becomes manifest, his pastor should meet with him, instructing him about the Church's teaching, informing him that he is not to present himself for Holy Communion until he brings to an end the objective situation of sin, and warning him that he will otherwise be denied the Eucharist if the person in question with obstinate persistence still presents himself to receive the Holy Eucharist. The minister of Holy Communion must refuse to distribute it. Must refuse to distribute it after a warning." But that's not the way Theodore McCarrick spun it. He never shared those words with the bishops at the time because he was more worried about protecting politicians than the sacraments. Instead, he told his fellow bishops, "I would emphasize that Cardinal Ratzinger clearly leaves to us as teachers, pastors, and leaders whether to pursue this path. The question for us is not simply whether denial of communion is possible, but whether it is pastorally wise and prudent." Just another instance of Theodore McCarrick lying or spinning the truth. Here is a cardinal who committed unspeakable evils against young men. He was stripped of his titles, laicized, and yet the McCarrick doctrine lives. The Church and the bishops have a choice to make. When deciding whether to deny recalcitrant politicians communion, they can either stand with Theodore McCarrick or Joseph Ratzinger. Those are the only choices. Now is the time to choose. The Church, the people in the pews, are watching. To help us make sense of all of this, I'm joined by the former head of the Vatican's Doctrinal Office, the CDF, Gerhard Cardinal Muller. He joins us from EWTN studios in Rome. Also, theologian, papal biographer, and author of the new book, Not Forgotten, George Weigel. Thank you both for being here. Cardinal Louis Ladaria, the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, in his letter denied the USCCB President Jose Gomez's request to make public that Ratzinger letter, even though it's on the web. I don't know why it was such a big deal. But anyway, Cardinal Ladaria did acknowledge that the principles in Ratzinger's letter may assist the bishops in drafting their own document on the subject, but those principles, quote, should only be discussed within the context of the CDF's authoritative doctrinal note of 2002 on some questions regarding the participation of Catholics in political life. Cardinal Muller, why not release the Ratzinger letter from 2004? It was so clear on this issue.
Yeah, everybody knows the content of this letter, and everybody knows the opinion of the former Cardinal Ratzinger and the Pope Benedict XVI. And the principles are very clear. There is no reason to hide it. It is very clear that you are the Catholic in public life and in the politics. You have to follow the principles of the Catholic doctrine, and you cannot act in favor of abortion. Abortion is a crime against the life of a human being, and therefore I don't see no chance to enter into a dialogue about the life of people, only how to do it. You can discuss, you can enter in a dialogue, but you cannot enter in a dialogue about the reality that human life is given by God, and we have to protect the life of God. And this is the first mission of the Catholic Church, to say the truth.
George, Cardinal Ladaria noted that the topic of worthiness for reception of communion had been raised during the 2019-2020 ad limina visits of the U.S. bishops to Pope Francis, and that there was some steps that needed to be taken. He writes, the effective development of a policy in this area requires that dialogue occurs in two stages, first among the bishops themselves, and then between bishops and Catholic pro-choice politicians within their jurisdictions, end quote. Isn't this dialogue already underway, George?
It's one of the most puzzling things about Cardinal Ladaria's letter, Raymond, is that he doesn't seem to understand what's been going on in the church and between the church and Catholic public officials for the last 20 years at least. The issue here is not whether, as the Cardinal's letter suggests, these Catholic public officials understand the church's teaching. The issue is that they reject the church's teaching. And in rejecting it, not simply abstractly, but in their actions as public officials, they declare themselves out of full communion with the church, and therefore, in terms of their own integrity, should not present themselves for Holy Communion. The other thing that I find simply astonishing in this letter from Cardinal Ladaria is its notion of consensus. The Cardinal presses the bishops to come to a consensus on this question of Eucharistic coherence. Well, as I read the history of the Church, the First Council of Nicaea did not wait for the Arian bishops to agree with the Orthodox bishops before teaching the truth about the divinity of Christ. At the Council of Ephesus, the Nestorian bishops had their say, but when they were not persuaded, the rest of the assembly went ahead and taught the truth about Mary's title as Mother of God. More recently, we have an example of this in the work of Pope Paul VI in the last phase of the Second Vatican Council. The Pope was perfectly willing to let intransigents like Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre have their say against a conciliar declaration on religious freedom. He was not prepared to give them a veto over that. So he went ahead, got the broadest consensus he could behind a strong declaration of religious freedom, but did not give the intransigents a veto. Why are we giving the intransigents a very small group within the U.S. Bishops' Conference today? Why are they being given a veto? This is not collegiality.
Yeah. Cardinal Muller, in a comment that challenges the Bishops' Conference of the United States' position that abortion is the preeminent moral issue that voters have to grapple with and that Catholics should concern themselves with, Cardinal Ladaria writes, it would be misleading if such a statement were to give the impression that abortion and euthanasia alone constitute the only grave matters of Catholic moral and social teaching that demand the fullest accountability on the part of Catholics. Your Eminence, what do you make of that statement? And as far as public officials are concerned, aren't those two issues preeminent for public officials to at least agree to?
I think this is the first issue of the Church to pronounce the reality and the truth of human life, and this is a basic human right to live. and therefore we cannot balance other political aims with this basic human rights. We cannot say in China some things they are making good in the economy, but they don't respect human rights, and therefore we must enter in a dialogue with them. I think the first mission of the Church is to protect the human life, because it is given by God, and not the life is not one of values among other values. This is a basic value, and therefore I don't understand exactly the meaning of this. We have a primacy of the moral and not of political reasons, because some in the Vatican are in favor of the government of Biden, and therefore they want not to enter into a clinch with them. If we cannot look in a diplomatic way if they are content with us or not, we have to say the truth. If this is Biden or Trump or whoever, he's the president or the government or the administration of the United States or in other countries, the first mission of the Church is to declare the truth, and that the basic rights is the life of everybody. I don't understand where here is the problem. And not only to say, oh, later, we make a dialogue until the next 100 years. And in the meantime, everybody is promoting abortion and all euthanasia, and we are making a dialogue. Jesus didn't come for a dialogue in this way for hiding the revealed truth, but the word of God is very clear.
George, Ed Penton is now reporting that Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago and Cardinal Joseph Tobin of Newark met with Cardinal Ladaria of the CDF just days before he sent this letter to Archbishop Gomez, urging the bishops to slow roll any document regarding this pro-abortion Catholics receiving communion document. Both of these men oppose stricter rules on this issue. Your thoughts on the Cupich-Tobin visit to the CDF, and what does this say about synodality?
I think it's quite extraordinary, Raymond, that two members of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, in which all bishops have an equal voice and vote, two members of a distinct, very small minority within the U.S. Bishops' Conference, should take it upon themselves to go to Rome and try to get the Holy See to throw a spanner in the works of their brother bishops. And it seems to me that this ought to be discussed in executive session very, very forthrightly during the June bishops' meeting. If this kind of interference had happened from the other end of the ideological spectrum, there would have been an explosion of outrage in the past. And yet it's happening now. And moreover, Raymond, to go back to a point I was making earlier, if Cardinal Cupich and Cardinal Tobin were in fact the sources of Cardinal Ladaria's information about what's going on in the United States, they were not giving him the full picture. At every point in this discussion, the bishops have made clear that they are not one-issue political actors, that they intend to put this question of Eucharistic incoherence among Catholic public officials in the context of a much broader Eucharistic incoherence in the Church, in which so many people, according to the polls, don't really believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and that the bishops have addressed a broad spectrum of issues all the time.
Cardinal Muller, I need to get your reaction. Cardinal Ladaria seems to be discouraging the bishops from being too definitive in this topic at their June meeting. He suggests that, quote, dialogue among the bishops be undertaken to preserve unity of the Episcopal Conference in the face of disagreements over this controversial topic. The congregation notes that such a policy, given its possibly contentious nature, could have the opposite effect and become a source of discord rather than unity within the episcopate of the larger church in the United States. Your Eminence, does unanimity of thought trump canon law and truth in this case?
I think these two bishops came to Rome as members or representatives of the democratic parties, but the bishops are the representatives of Jesus Christ, of the revealed truth. And we cannot make here some plays and games of power and diplomacy and plays in the background. We must be very open and real and respect the truth. And what always during the 2000 years was very wrong, when the bishops was too close to the political reasons and games and so, and not on the line of the truth.
Cardinal Muller, I'm going to let you take a crack at this, and George as well. Do you believe the U.S. bishops will stand with Cardinal Ratzinger or Cardinal McCarrick on this issue of distribution of communion to dissenting Catholics? Your best guess, very quickly.
McCarrick is not a model for the future of the Catholicism in the United States or everywhere, and we know what were the problems. Not only surely the moral problems, but only he made politics and didn't complete his mission as a successor of the bishop, the servant of the truth and for the humanity and for the gospel and for the doctrine of the church. And model for the bishops can be the Cardinal Ratzinger and the former Cardinal as prefect and Pope Benedict and the other popes. But exactly Borromeo or all the great bishops after the Council of Trent and the reform of the church, but according to the word of God and not for the interests of the politicians.
George, the McCarrick doctrine or the Ratzinger doctrine, which one do you think the bishops will embrace before we move on to this Germany topic?
I think the Catholic doctrine, Raymond. There's a critical mass of bishops in the United States who understand that this administration has put the church at a real inflection point, certainly on the life issues, also on questions of basic biblical and Christian understandings of the human person, which this Equality Act that the administration is supporting is about to criminalize. I think the majority of bishops, the great majority of bishops, understand that. We've had some real leadership from individual bishops, Bishop Paprocki, Bishop Olmsted, Archbishop Aquila, Archbishop Cordileone. I expect to see a lot more of that. And I'm hoping that both the Bishops' Doctrine Committee and the Bishops' Pro-Life Committee will be making the situation very, very clear going forward. I think this whole thing is going to energize individual bishops to take up their responsibilities with the Catholic public officials under their spiritual guidance in a much more vigorous way.
Okay, let's move on to this topic that I know both of you have strong perspectives on and insights into. More than 100 Roman Catholic parishes in Germany offered blessings to gay couples this past Monday in defiance of church teaching and their own bishops. On March 15th, the Vatican explicitly forbade priests from blessing same-sex unions. Cardinal Muller, what do you make of this move by these parishes in Germany, and are we headed for a schism here?
I think what happened in Germany, in some parts of Germany, was more a comic tragedy than nothing to do with the Catholic doctrine and Catholic faith. This is a provocation, a political provocation against the unity with Rome, against the clear explanation of the Word of God. The Bible is very clear in this point, and there is no possibility to bless acts which are a sin according to the Bible and to the Word of God. Nothing to other question with these people which are involved in these problems. But the Catholic Church or the Christians, all the Christians have to follow the Word of God. And this is a form of heresy, not only of schism, but also of heresy. And it happened only in those dioceses where the bishop is not very clear. And in so much dioceses where we have good bishops, good Catholic bishops, it didn't happen because leading of the bishops is very good, and only in some dioceses where the bishop is not a good theologian or don't know what is doctrine of the church, or is looking more to the reaction of the mass media, there we have the problems.
George, this German blessing event, it was entitled Love Wins, Blessing Service for Lovers, end quote. It took place in Munich, in Berlin, Frankfurt, and Cologne. In a statement on the event website, it said this was in response to the Vatican's no to same-sex blessings. They said, we will continue to accompany people who enter into a binding partnership in the future and bless their relationship. We do not refuse a blessing ceremony. These pastors are acting obviously in open defiance of the church. What should be the response here, George?
Well, I think Cardinal Muller identified the root of the issue, Raymond, and it's important to get that clear. This is not simply a matter of ecclesiastical discipline. It's a matter of the reality and binding force of divine revelation. I've read many statements from priests who engaged in these ersatz blessings this past weekend, and they uniformly say, we know better than God. We know better than the teaching of the Bible. We know better than the teaching of the church. This is apostasy. This is a denial of the fundamental reality of divine revelation and its binding authority over time. And if this is not addressed forcefully by either the bishops of Germany, of whom I am slightly more skeptical than Cardinal Muller seems to be, or by Rome, this would seem to be something to which Cardinal Ladaria should direct his attention, then we are going to have a church in Germany that is de facto an apostate church, and no longer can be considered as part of the communion of Catholic faith. When you say we know better, then you are on a different team here. This, of course, was the issue, as Cardinal Muller will remember, at the 2014 and 2015 synods, when you had bishops getting up and say, look, we know more about marriage than Jesus did, or we know more about worthiness to receive Holy Communion than St. Paul did. This is apostasy, and it's time to start describing it for what it is.
Yeah. Cardinal Muller, in a statement, Bishop Georg Batzing, the president of the German Bishops' Conference, had this to say to pastors organizing these blessing services for same-sex couples. He said, I do not consider public actions such as those planned for May 10th to be a helpful sign and a further path. These blessing services have their own theological dignity and pastoral significance and are therefore not suitable as an instrument for church political manifestations or protest actions. Cardinal Muller, what do you make of Batzing's statement? He's clearly trying to distance himself from the event, though it should be said Bishop Batzing has called for widespread changes in church teaching regarding gay marriage and other matters.
Yes, this distanciation is coming too late. Who is responsible for the point in which we are? First, they spoke about the possibility of blessings. They protested openly against the the CDF, against the responsum, against the doctrine of the church. They are saying openly, bishops are saying, what is written in the Bible is only a impression of Christians 2,000 years ago and not the word of God. If you deny the basic of our Christian and Catholic faith, you cannot give an answer to this provocation. Is not only political provocation. Surely the form is a political provocation, but in reality is provocation against God, against the word, revealed word of God. God created the human being, man and woman, and the image of God is consisting in the both genders, male and female, and nobody in the world can change this reality of creation and the sacramental reality is that the union of one man and one woman in the marriage is a sacrament, and nobody can change it, and they cannot relativize the word of God in this way. And some bishops now are speaking very loud, and also the president, they don't have a real understanding of their own task as bishops. They must read the 3rd chapter of Lumen Gentium. What is a bishop? And it's not a political actor in the church and an ideology to promoting their own ideologies. They have to see and to look to what is the revelation, the divine revelation.
George Weigel, I'm going to give you the last word. How important is this moment in Germany? I mean, is this a stunt, or does Rome have to get involved here for the sake of the universal church?
Well, I think for the sake of the exercise of his Petrine ministry, the Pope has to get involved, as do his closest advisors. This is quite serious. And if I could just throw in a word for my book, which you kindly mentioned at the beginning, Not Forgotten, the two chapters in there on John Paul II, I think give us an idea of how a genuine bishop acts. He acts in prayer. He acts in fidelity to the revealed Word of God. He acts in fidelity to his oath as a bishop. Every bishop on the day of his ordination swears a solemn oath to teach the fullness of Catholic faith. That is not happening in some places. It's being fudged in other places, to go back to our earlier discussion about the United States. And this is deeply problematic for the Church, and therefore needs to be thoroughly aired out now and in the future.
Your Eminence, Cardinal Gerhard Muller, George Weigel, thank you both for being here. And George's book, as he mentioned, Not Forgotten, is available at bookstores everywhere. Thank you both for being here.